The house was silent when I stepped inside, the kind of silence that presses in on you, heavy and expectant. It was the first time I'd crossed this threshold since my uncle's funeral, and the memories hit me with the force of a wave, sharp, cold, and strangely intimate. His presence lingered everywhere, woven into the very air, as if he had only just stepped out and would be back any moment. But he wouldn't. And that truth sat like a stone in my chest. My mother had called 2 weeks earlier, with a voice trembling between nerves and disbelief, telling me that my uncle, whom I had barely known, had left everything to us. Not part of his assets, not a share. Everything. The house, the land, the accounts, the business ties, even the debts that came with them. It felt unreal at first, like a mistake waiting to be corrected by a lawyer's phone call. But the documents were real, stamped and signed. The responsibility was ours now, whether we were ready or not. The scent of old wood mixed with faint tobacco clung to the walls. My uncle had been a man of routine, meticulous, deliberate, private. Growing up, I saw him only through occasional glimpses, a stern nod during holidays, a short visit when he passed through town, a handshake that felt more like a business agreement than affection. And yet here I was, walking through the echo of his life, trying to understand why he had chosen us to inherit everything he had guarded so fiercely. I wandered deeper into the hallway, my footsteps stirring dust that sparkled in the dim afternoon light. Framed photographs hung crookedly, frozen fragments of a life I had never fully been part of. My uncle, as a young soldier. My uncle standing beside my father, both of them smiling in a way I never saw later in life. My uncle shaking hands with men in suits, faces stern and eyes sharp. These images suggested a version of him far more complex than the distant relative I had known. The living room felt untouched, as if he'd paused time before he died. Books lay open on the coffee table, their pages yellowed but marked with pencil notes in the margins. A half-finished glass of brandy sat beside an ashtray. The curtains were half-drawn, casting the room in a warm, muted glow. I pulled the curtains fully and let sunlight flood the space, watching dust rise, like motes of memory. For a moment, I imagined him sitting in his leather chair, studying reports, muttering to himself the way some men do when thinking. The image felt too real, and I caught myself holding my breath. It wasn't just the inheritance that weighed on me. It was the question behind it. Why us? Why me? My mother didn't know. She and my uncle had barely spoken for years. Whatever bond they once had dissolved long before I was born. And yet, somewhere in the tangle of old family tensions, something had led him to choose us, to trust us, with everything. I moved into his study, the heart of the house. Dark shelves lined the walls, filled with meticulously labeled folders, books on economics, trade, politics, and history topics he seemed to live and breathe. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface a battlefield of documents and letters. The chair creaked as I sat in it, facing the panoramic window that overlooked the fields beyond. The land was beautiful, wild, open, and timeless. My uncle must have spent hours here, looking out at this view, lost in thought. On the desk, beneath piles of financial records, I found a single envelope with my name written in bold, uneven strokes. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, no more than a few lines, but every word carved itself into me. You will understand in time. Keep it together. The legacy is not in the wealth, but in how you protect it. No explanation, no apology, no affection, just a warning and a responsibility I barely understood. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls had shifted a fraction inward. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a task, a challenge, a burden disguised as opportunity. And whether I was ready for it or not, it was mine. That day, standing in the quiet heart of his home, I made a silent promise. I would uncover the truth behind his choices. I would learn who he had been, what he had built, and why he had trusted me with all of it, even if the answers changed everything I thought I knew about our family. And deep down, beneath all the doubt and confusion, something else stirred, something like anticipation. Because for the first time in my life, I felt the beginning of a story that was finally mine to inherit. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains of my uncle's house, washing the room in pale gold. I hadn't slept well, my mind buzzed with questions, restless as a trapped insect. The letter, short as it was, had carved itself deeply into my thoughts. You will understand in time. It felt less like reassurance and more like a riddle left deliberately incomplete. I rose from the stiff guest bed and walked into the hallway, the floorboards groaning under each step. The air still carried that familiar mixture of dust, tobacco, and something harder to define, perhaps the residue of ambition, discipline, and secrets. I made myself coffee in the kitchen, a place that felt strangely untouched by emotion, almost sterile compared to the rest of the house. As I sipped the bitter drink, my eyes drifted to the stack of folders I had brought from the study the night before. It was time to explore them. Back in the study, sunlight spilled across the desk, revealing every crease and flaw in the ancient wood. I took a deep breath and began opening the folders one by one. Financial reports, contracts, letters marked with names I didn't recognize. At first glance, it all seemed ordinary, just the paperwork of a man who lived in the world of business. But as I dug deeper, I found patterns that made my stomach tighten. Payments made to companies with no clear purpose. Transactions that circled back to people with no online presence. Notes written in my uncle's sharp handwriting referencing events and decisions without enough context to decipher. It was as if he had lived two lives: the respectable businessman the world saw, and someone far more complex hidden beneath. Maybe that was why he had left everything to us, because the truth of his life wasn't something he could pass down casually. It had to be discovered. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the sky. Papers soon blanketed the desk and spilled onto the floor. I found myself drawn to one binder in particular, heavier and older than the rest. Its leather cover had softened with time, and the clasp was nearly rusted. Inside were logs entries written by hand, spanning years. Some were mundane notes about shipments, meetings, or deals, but others hinted at something more. One entry stood out. If things continue this way, I may need to involve him. He doesn't know it yet, but he will carry the weight better than I did. Beneath it was a date 3 years before his death. I felt a chill crawl along my spine. Was he talking about me? Why would he think I could handle anything better than he could? I barely even knew him. Another entry read, "Trust is earned through silence, not promises." The words felt like a fragment of his philosophy, something he lived by. They also felt like a warning. I leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of everything I had read settling onto my shoulders. The legacy he had handed down wasn't just wealth, it was a labyrinth of choices he had made, alliances he had forged, and risks he had taken. And for reasons still unclear, he believed I needed to inherit all of it. Just as I was about to close the binder, a piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. I unfolded it carefully. It was a map, hand-drawn, rough, marked with symbols and notes I didn't understand. But one thing stood out: a red circle around a location on the northern edge of the property, where the fields met the woods, a place I had never explored. My heartbeat quickened. Whatever he wanted me to find, whatever truth he believed I needed to understand, it was connected to that place. That evening, with the sky darkening and the wind rustling through the tall grass, I stood at the edge of the woods, clutching the map. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I stepped forward, branches cracked beneath my feet. Every instinct urged me to turn back, to return to the safety of the house, and pretend none of this was my responsibility. But I moved deeper into the woods, guided by the map, driven by a need I couldn't quite articulate. The deeper I went, the darker it became. Shadows twisted between the trees, and the faint sound of distant water echoed through the air. Then I saw it, a structure partially hidden by the overgrowth. A shed, old and weathered, its roof sagging under years of neglect. My uncle had circled this place for a reason. I approached slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The padlock on the door was rusted but intact. With a bit of pressure, it snapped open. The hinges groaned as I pushed the door inward. Inside, dust hovered in the air like suspended time. And on the far wall, exactly where the map had indicated, something glinted in the fading light. A locked metal box. And on its surface, scratched in uneven strokes, was my name. The metal box felt cold beneath my fingertips, colder than anything else in the shed, as if it had been waiting in silence for years. Dust clung to its corners and rust ate away at its hinges, but the carved letters my name were clear, deliberate, and unsettling. Someone had scratched it deeply, as though ensuring the message would remain long after everything else faded. For a moment, I simply stood there, frozen. My breath seemed too loud in the suffocating stillness of the shed. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and old metal, and the fading twilight struggled to reach the corners of the room. I forced myself to move, kneeling before the box and brushing the dust away with trembling hands. The lock wasn't new. It wasn't even particularly strong. The key, if one existed, was nowhere in sight. I hesitated for several seconds before gripping the lid and giving it a sharp pull. The metal groaned in protest but yielded, snapping the weakened lock clean off. Inside the box was a collection of objects that made even less sense than the strange paperwork I'd found in the study. On top lay a thick envelope sealed with dark red wax. Beneath it were several old photos, their edges curled and yellowed. A small notebook rested at the bottom, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. But the envelope drew my attention first. My uncle's handwriting was unmistakable, strong, angular strokes that carried a lifetime of precision. "For when you are ready." My heart pounded. Ready for what? For answers? For the truth he had never spoken aloud? Or for responsibilities I never asked for but could no longer ignore? I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear the aged paper inside. The letter was several pages long, written in the same unmistakable hand. Each word felt heavy, deliberate, chosen with care. If you are reading this, then the time I feared has come. The first line alone made my throat tighten. What I have built, I did not build alone. And what I protected, I could not protect forever. There are things buried in our family's past, things I tried to shield you from, but the world does not let secrets rest. They always rise. I felt a chill. The shed suddenly seemed smaller, the shadows deeper. You must decide for yourself how much of this legacy you will carry. But know this. Strength is not born from certainty, but from stepping forward even when you cannot see the path. He spoke of people he trusted, people he distrusted, worlds he moved between half in the open, half in the dark. He warned me that some might come seeking what he left behind. He told me about alliances that had fractured, deals that were made in desperation, and a final choice he had made that could no longer be undone. But the most unsettling part was a single sentence at the end of the second page. You were always meant to finish what I could not. I didn't understand it. How could he expect me to finish anything when I didn't even know what he had begun? My life up until now had been ordinary, quiet, predictable. I had never been part of his world, whatever that world truly was. The letter continued. Go through the notebook next. It contains only what you need to know now. The rest will reveal itself in time. With shaking hands, I set the letter aside and reached into the box for the notebook. The leather felt strangely warm in my hands. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a map, not like the rough one from the binder, but a detailed layout of the entire property, marked with symbols and annotations. Some areas were crossed out, others were circled. A few carried warnings. There were also first names, only next to specific locations. Some had arrows pointing toward hidden paths, storage areas, and something labeled the junction. The more pages I turned, the clearer it became that my uncle's life had been far from simple. He had navigated an underground network of favors and debts, of partnerships that existed in shadows and agreements that never touched paper. Whatever he had been involved in, it was bigger than business. And now, somehow, it involved me. I closed the notebook, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were trembling, my pulse racing. The shed seemed colder now, as though the truth itself had chilled the air. As I stood and stepped back into the fading light outside, a sharp breeze cut through the trees. The sky had darkened to a deep blue, the first stars beginning to glimmer. I clutched the notebook and letter against my chest, unsure whether I felt closer to answers or further from them. One thing was clear, though. Whatever secret my uncle had guarded all these years, whatever burden he had passed on, I could no longer walk away from it. And somewhere out there, someone else already knew that the legacy had shifted to me. The night weighed heavily on me as I returned to the house, each step dragging more than the last. The notebook throbbed in my grip, heavy not from its size but from the truths hidden within its worn pages. Every rustle of wind through the trees sounded deliberate, as though someone was trailing me. I could almost feel eyes on my back, but each time I turned, the forest stood silent and still beneath the cold moonlight. Inside the house, the thick, unmoving silence seemed to anticipate the revelations I had unearthed. I placed the notebook and the letter on the dining table, their edges catching the dim overhead light. Pacing across the wooden floor, my chest tightened with each step. The map in the notebook dominated my thoughts. My uncle had etched symbols across the property, a hidden language only he could decipher, but one mark stood out among the rest: the junction. It was an unknown place. No structure, no sign, no familiar name except to him. 3 circles around it, seemingly both a warning and an invitation. Notes beside it read, "Only in emergencies. Buried, but not lost. Don't go alone." The contradictions in his words made my pulse spike. He urged caution, yet demanded action. Sleep had long abandoned me. I stood at the window at dawn, watching the skeletal trees sway in the breeze. My reflection was foreign wide eyes, tight jaw, tense shoulders. Fear, determination, or both? I couldn't distinguish. But I knew the truth awaited somewhere outside. The forest that morning was eerily still, the air heavy with dew and earthy scents. Following the notebook's instructions meticulously, 47 paces from the dead oak, left at the crooked stream, then south to a shallow basin, I navigated undergrowth for nearly an hour before reaching a small clearing. Light filtered through fragments of the canopy, illuminating mossy, uneven ground. At the center, a deliberate anomaly emerged, a wooden hatch, half buried and weathered to near blackness. I knelt, brushing away layers of decayed leaves and soil. The angular symbol from the notebook appeared carved deep into the wood. A chill ran through me. My fingers closed around the iron ring embedded in the hatch, rough and cold. I pulled. At first it resisted, the earth clinging possessively. Then it gave way with a dull crack, releasing a rush of frigid, stale air. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. For a few seconds, fear rooted me in place. Every instinct screamed to retreat. Yet my uncle's warnings echoed, a hand guiding me forward. I descended. The wooden steps groaned beneath each footfall. Daylight faded, replaced by the dim orange flicker of a lone bulb at the tunnel's end. Packed earth walls, reinforced with trembling wooden beams, pressed in on all sides. At the tunnel's conclusion stood a steel door, a stark contrast to the ancient surroundings, modern, solid, impenetrable. A keypad glimmered beside it. My uncle had designed this with intention, secrecy, and purpose. But what warranted such concealment? Scratched into the wall beside the door were words that froze me. Trust is earned through silence. His creed, rule, and warning. My fingers hovered over the keypad. The code was unknown, but intuition guided me to a single date: the day he died. The keypad beeped. The lock clicked. The steel door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room bathed in sterile white light. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, stacked with documents, sealed cases, photographs, and equipment of mysterious purpose. The central table was buried under maps, blueprints, and files labeled with names some familiar, some foreign, some chilling. This was no ordinary storage space. It was an operations center. I stepped cautiously inside, the door thudding shut behind me. My pulse pounded as I approached the table. Papers outlined plans spanning decades, detailing people in positions of influence, connections to whispered organizations. Then I saw it. A black file, edges pristine. My name typed across the front, created long before I ever set foot here. A cold wave washed over me. I reached for the file, but before my fingers touched it, a sound drifted through the tunnel behind the steel door. A footstep. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone else was here, and they had followed me into the dark. The echo of footsteps reverberated through the narrow tunnel, bouncing off the packed earth walls, filling the space with a sinister rhythm that seemed synchronized with my heartbeat. I froze, the cold sweat on my brow blending with the chill emanating from the hatch I had just opened. Every nerve screamed for caution. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet curiosity, perhaps foolish bravery, kept my feet rooted. The room's sterile white light cast long, unnatural shadows, stretching across the piles of documents and maps, each a testament to decades of secrets my uncle had meticulously compiled. I approached the black file bearing my name, fingers trembling as I traced its sharp edges. The weight of its existence pressed down on me, heavy with anticipation. I could almost feel my uncle's presence, his silent guidance seeping through the layers of paper and ink. Each document painted a story of careful planning, alliances made and broken, influences extended in shadows, far beyond ordinary understanding. Names of people I knew only by reputation intertwined with others I didn't know, and the purpose of these connections remained shrouded in cryptic notes, arrows, and hastily scrawled dates. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, each step heavy with intent. Someone had followed me, someone aware of my intrusion and the significance of the room. My mind raced. Who could it be? How did they know? My pulse thundered in my ears, and I realized my uncle's words were true. The world he had built and the secrets he had buried were far from benign. They were dangerous. I dropped the file onto the table and stepped back, the wooden floor creaking, a betraying sound echoing ominously. Shadows flickered across the walls as if the room itself were breathing, reacting to the tension that had flooded every corner. My eyes darted to the far end of the room, where a narrow ventilation shaft loomed. Could it be an escape route or a trap? Each second stretched interminably, the suspense suffocating. A whisper of movement behind me, a soft shuffle. The scrape of leather against metal sent a jolt through my body. I spun, heart hammering, to see a figure emerging from the shadows. Cloaked in darkness, their features obscured, they carried an aura of menace, of someone who had long inhabited the world my uncle had meticulously constructed. My voice caught in my throat. I tried to call out, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. "Who's there?" The figure stepped closer, slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if daring me to act. In their hand, a small object glimmered under the harsh artificial light. I squinted, trying to discern its purpose. Was it a weapon, a key, or something more symbolic? My instincts screamed, warning me not to underestimate the danger, reminding me of the countless hours my uncle spent safeguarding his legacy, leaving traps, contingencies, and warnings for anyone unworthy. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the weight of history beneath my fingertips. Every instinct told me to retreat, to grab the file and flee back into the cold night above, to lock the hatch behind me and never return. But something deeper held me in place. The truth, buried and hidden for decades, was within reach, and to abandon it now would be to dishonor the very life my uncle had fought to preserve. The figure paused, the glint in their hand catching the light, and then, unexpectedly, they spoke. A voice, calm yet layered with intent, echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't have come here alone." My mind raced, piecing together every fragment of advice, every cryptic note, every precaution my uncle embedded in his notebook, maps, and coded journals. I realized with sinking certainty that this encounter was no accident. Every detail, the location, the symbols, the warning to never go alone had led me here, into a confrontation set in motion long before I was born. A tense silence settled, the room holding its breath alongside me. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the weight of secrets, the echo of a past refusing to remain buried, and the inevitability of choices yet to be made. I had crossed a threshold that could not be undone, and the consequences of what I discovered would ripple far beyond this underground chamber. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling hands, and slowly opened the black file. The paper crackled under my fingers, each sheet a revelation, each sentence a puzzle piece in my uncle's intricate design. And as the figure watched, silent and unyielding, I realized I was no longer just a seeker of truth, I had become part of it, a player in a story larger, darker, and more complex than I had ever imagined. The morning of the trial broke under a thick gray sky, a blanket of clouds casting a solemn shadow over the courthouse. As Suzanne drove, I gripped the edge of the car door, feeling each heartbeat thump like a warning of the storm ahead. Silence hung between us, heavy and almost suffocating, interrupted only by the occasional hum of passing cars. Sleep had eluded me all night. The events of the past year, endless whispers, threats, and subtle manipulations replayed relentlessly in my mind, a grim loop I could not escape. My mother and Emmy's plan to claim what was never theirs gnawed at me, each imagined conversation stoking my anxiety. The courthouse appeared monumental, a fortress of stone and glass, its presence alone capable of intimidating. Each step toward its entrance felt like a descent into a battlefield where everything my father had built could be uprooted in a single motion. The smell of damp concrete and polished wood mingled in the air, heightening my unease. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation and tension. Lawyers whispered, papers shuffled, and journalists jotted frantically in their notepads, capturing the drama of a family battle for legacy and money. I immediately spotted my mother and Emmy across the room, their faces masks of calculated composure. They projected confidence, the kind that feels hollow when backed by deception. Years of estrangement and manipulation had led to this moment, and they were ready to press their advantage. Tom, our lawyer, gave me a subtle nod, his calm presence a stark contrast to the storm within me. He had guided us through this chaos with a patience born of countless battles, his strategies sharp, deliberate, and unyielding. "Stay focused," he whispered. "Truth always surfaces." The trial began, and the opposing counsel painted my mother as the long-suffering, devoted spouse, framing her as the quiet force behind my father's success. Each claim was steeped in drama, describing sleepless nights and emotional sacrifices that supposedly justified her claim. Emmy's voice followed in harmony, rehearsed, precise, a sword aimed at both the inheritance and my character. The courtroom, a place of fact and law, felt charged with betrayal, and each word felt like an assault on both memory and justice. When it was my turn, the courtroom seemed to shrink around me. My throat dry, hands trembling, I recounted memories that bore the weight of truth. Weekends spent sorting electronic components with my father. Nights he stayed awake, planning the company's future. The lessons of integrity and hard work he imparted. I told of the years after the divorce, when my mother's absence left him and me to manage the trials of a growing business alone. I spoke of employees whose lives he transformed, of the community initiatives he started, and the sacrifices he made silently for those he valued most. Tom meticulously presented evidence, financial records, employee testimonies, excerpts from my father's journals. One journal entry, raw and candid, described sleepless nights, financial gambles, and despair, yet also hope and pride, rooted in the knowledge that I would continue his work. It gave the court a glimpse of the real man behind the business empire, humanizing the struggle and the triumph. The day blurred into hours of cross-examinations, arguments, and rebuttals. Every claim my mother and Emmy made was met with evidence, their narratives dismantled piece by piece. Their confidence began to crack, revealing the fragility beneath their rehearsed words. In those moments, I felt a quiet relief, not triumph or arrogance, but a deep sense that truth, long suppressed, was finally recognized. By evening, the judge called a recess. Stepping outside, I breathed deeply, the cool air washing over me. Suzanne stood beside me, her hand light on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and understanding. The battle was far from over, but the first victory had been won. The whispers of deceit would not vanish overnight, yet I had defended not just the inheritance, but my father's legacy, a testament to diligence, vision, and integrity. The courtroom storm had arrived, fierce and unyielding, but I was prepared to face it with truth as my shield, fortified by memories and the steadfast support of those who truly embodied the meaning of family. The courthouse doors closed behind us with a quiet thud that seemed to signal the end of a long nightmare. After months of tension, legal arguments, and sleepless nights, the case was finally over. Outside, the city seemed calm, almost oblivious to the storm we had endured. Suzanne drove in silence, her hands tight on the wheel, and I stared out the window, letting the sunlight filter in through the trees and buildings, illuminating the long shadow of exhaustion that had been hanging over me. Relief settled in, but it was heavy, tempered by the enormous responsibility now resting squarely on my shoulders. Even with the legal battle behind us, the effects lingered. Gossip had spread like wildfire, painting us in distorted colors, in the eyes of some in our community. Yet there were allies too, clients, employees, and friends whose trust in us had remained unbroken. Rebuilding that trust became our immediate priority. I spent the first weeks personally reaching out to key clients, assuring them that the business remained solid, reliable, and guided by the same principles my father had instilled. Meetings with employees were emotional. I reaffirmed their roles and emphasized the stability of their positions. Their faith and dedication reminded me of my father's own ethos: loyalty, integrity, and the power of a community bound by trust and shared purpose. Suzanne and I also had to deal with personal wounds that no legal victory could heal. She confided her fear, the sense of being a bystander in a family drama she never asked to witness. I shared my own guilt and fatigue, the endless nights spent poring over accounts, journals, and testimonies. Together, we became anchors for each other, grounding ourselves in memories of my father's warmth, humor, and relentless dedication to his work and family. We focused on what we could create in his memory. The scholarship fund had evolved into something tangible, helping local students pursue careers in fields my father had always loved: business, technology, and engineering. The small ceremony we held inviting students, families, and educators was a reminder of his vision for a better future, one in which dedication, curiosity, and ethical conduct were celebrated. Seeing the students' eyes light up with ambition, I felt a glimpse of the hope my father had always believed in, a reminder that even in the shadow of loss, one could create light. Interactions with my mother and Emmy were now purely formal, confined to necessary legal communication. Their choices had become crystal clear: greed over reconciliation. Emotional separation was painful, but necessary to protect the peace of mind and the legacy my father had built. I had come to understand that a legacy is more than wealth. It is values, ethics, and the relationships nurtured along the way. The company, the scholarship fund, and the circle of loyal employees and friends were the living proof of that vision. Every decision I made carried weight, not just for the present, but for the future my father had imagined. Late at night, I would often sit in my father's office. The smell of polished wood and paper lingered, memories of long discussions about strategy, ethics, and life flooding back. Suzanne would join me sometimes, and together we would reflect quietly, talking about what mattered: family, trust, purpose. The office became a sanctuary, a place where grief and responsibility intersected, providing clarity and focus. We had survived a storm, battled forces that tested our resolve, and emerged intact and determined. Months passed, and the company flourished again. New projects, partnerships, and innovations began to take shape. The scholarship fund continued to expand, touching lives far beyond what I had imagined. The shadow of the legal battle remained as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the consequences of betrayal. But through this, we forged something stronger: a renewed commitment to integrity, a united community, and a clear understanding of our purpose. Looking back, I realized this chapter of my life had been both a trial and a revelation. I had confronted betrayal, navigated complex emotions, and defended my father's vision against forces intent on dismantling it. Victory was not merely about legal triumphs, it was about protecting values, nurturing trust, and facing life's harsh realities with courage. Suzanne and I looked forward, knowing that this was not the end, but the continuation of a legacy we were determined to honor, protect, and expand, guided by the lessons of the past and the enduring spirit of my father's dreams. I endured betrayal, loss, and legal battles, yet upheld my father's values. This journey taught me that true strength lies in integrity, family, and the support of those who stand by you.